Omri Lewis Show.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Thank you for joining us. At any time, you can email the program at arilewishow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station at Israel Sports and News Radio at gmail.com. Even though the NBA Finals is behind us, at least the 2015 edition, still a lot to be talked about in terms of free agency, including one of our own. Here to talk about this is our NBA correspondent. Back to the program, Mr. Joe Robbins. Joe, how you doing out there?
I'm doing well, thanks, Ari. Always great to be on, and like you mentioned, an exciting time now for the NBA, even though it's the off season with all of the free agency goings on.
Yeah, one of the free agents involved is our very own Israeli star Omri Casspi, the first Israeli to play in the NBA. He signs a deal with the Kings, and now he started off, if you're scoring at home, with the Sacramento Kings. He also played in Cleveland and Houston, and kind of with the Pelicans, but not really, and had a second stint with the Kings, and they're going to keep him on for a couple of years. Tell us terms of the deal.
Yeah, so Casspi will be returning to Sacramento for another 2 years. It's a 2-year deal, $6 million. The last 2 years he had gone the veterans minimum, so this year he made just over $1 million. So it's a nice pay raise for him, going from $1 million to $3 million for each of the next 2 years. But even more importantly, something you and I have discussed on the show before, Sacramento really seems to be the best fit for him. And if there's a better fit in the NBA for Omri, no one's found it yet. He started his career off in Sacramento, and he wanted to come back. They wanted him to come back. Quality signing overall for all parties concerned.
You think this is his last contract in the NBA? I mean, he's got a couple more years before he hits 30. Seems kind of like that journeyman player. You know, he'll give some solid minutes with Sacramento, but after the 2 years, do you see him back in Israel or playing for a European team?
You know, I think he'll keep going in the NBA. I think he's a guy who will play his full career in the NBA, or at least, you know, have a 10 or 11 year career in the NBA. I think he gets one more contract after this, assuming he stays healthy. Like you mentioned, when he finishes this contract, he would be 29 years old since he came right out of high school, so he's still young. He'd have 8 years NBA experience under his belt at that point. Yeah, so I think that Casspi will get one more NBA contract after this. He'll be 29 years old, as you mentioned, when this contract ends. Still relatively young, still in his prime, and he really seems to me like a guy who's an NBA lifer. Now that changes for every player, and obviously, you know, some guys play for 10 years as an NBA lifer, and some guys play for 15 or even a few more years. So that remains to be seen. But when I look at him versus other European guards who have gone back to Europe, I think the only way that he returns to Europe or to Israel is by choice, and I only see that happening for him to wrap up his career with Maccabi Tel Aviv, where it all got started. I think after this contract, he'll sign another 2 or 3 year deal, and assuming he stays healthy, starting now, I don't see any reason why he won't be in the NBA for another 4 or 5 years. This was his best year since his rookie season. Again, the second half of the season was mostly in garbage time on the Kings, but having said that, he had some of the best games of his career. He averaged almost 20 points a game on 50% shooting over the second half of the season. And I don't care how bad your team is, you're doing that. you're making a real contribution and showing that you can play. So, Sacramento definitely wanted him back because they recognize how important a part of their system is, but also the team chemistry. We saw Omri be the odd man out before during a coaching change in Sacramento and then in Houston. George Karl, he's George Karl's type of player, a big man who's really a stretch three, listed as a power forward. Really, he's a small forward with great height and length who can shoot the three. So I think he'll make it in Sacramento and then be able to keep on playing, and then right off into the sunset in Israel if he wants 1 year at home after retiring from a great value career, if not a superstar one in the NBA.
What's interesting is that if you look at basketball prime, it's about 28 years old. That's where a lot of these guys won their first MVP. Talking about a Duncan, a Barkley, I believe Kevin Garnett was 29. MJ and Iverson were 25. Kobe, I think, was 29, 30. But around this time that Caspi's in, actually is his prime. Maybe could he make an All-Star team next year? If he's averaging 20 points a game through a whole season, or by the time the All-Star break comes, would you see him potentially making a slot and representing the West?
I think the potential is definitely there. I think the skill set and the talent are there. We've seen him mature as a player. We saw his shot get better, specifically his outside shot, rebound back to where he was as a rookie, not because of volume, but because of shot selection. I think he's matured a lot in terms of that. And he definitely has the body type in George Karl's system to thrive in this NBA. I think the biggest impediment to him making an all-star team is that the minutes just won't be there. Sacramento will be a bad team again, but I don't think without injury they envision him as a starter. I think they want him to be someone off the bench who brings tempo, who scores important baskets for them with the second unit. So I think he can have a really good productive year like last year. I think he can average double-digit figures for the first time since his rookie year when he broke 10 points a game. And played almost the entire season, but I think it'll be tough for him to get the minutes to be an all-star, even though I do think that his play will continue improving.
So you know what? Exciting times. Maybe I'm looking at this a bit differently. I said at the beginning, perhaps this is his last contract in the NBA, but maybe not. Maybe maybe it doesn't make an All-Star team, but if he can go real solid year and do this a couple more years, then he might be around a bit longer than I thought. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports News Radio. Speaking with Joe Robbins about NBA free agency. Let's move over to the other Israeli who played in the NBA, Gal Mekel. Didn't really make it with the Mavericks and wanted to go to the Pacers, and a bit of issue with his visa. There were talks about him playing with Maccabi Tel-Aviv, and then those talks broke off. Can you give us any updates at this point?
Yeah, so the latest is Maccabi offered him a deal. Reports are it was a multi-year deal, 3-year deal, with a buyout like all the EuroLeague contracts are. But it came down to timing. Gall didn't want to sign anywhere before July 10th, and on July 9th, Maccabi decided that even though they really wanted him, they needed to move forward with their free agency. They wanted to start structuring their team. While I'm sure they would make a spot for him if he was ready, it sounded like the timing was off, and they said something to that effect and wished him well in announcing that they were breaking off negotiations. He is in Florida right now working out, getting ready for auditions with NBA teams, for Summer League, all of those different things. and he's not in a position to be in Israel or focusing on Israeli basketball. He's really going 100% as hard as he can, trying to make it in the NBA this year. And I think for that reason, he and Maccabi Tel Aviv both decided, even though it was a tough decision, I'm sure, for both sides, because Maccabi wants him, and
they didn't win the championship this year. They didn't go to the finals. They need a rebuilding year, as scary as that sounds. That would have been a big splash to get Gall to come back to play in Israel and play for Maccabi.
Definitely. First year in 22 years, they didn't make the EuroLeague final. It is a rebuilding year, like you said. As crazy as it sounds, it is a rebuilding year. Having an Israeli, especially one who's so talented, would have been huge for them. They definitely wanted it to happen, and there's no doubt in my mind, and I think no doubt in Maccabi's mind, that Gall wants to be on Maccabi if he's not going to be in the NBA. The real issue is he wants to be in the NBA more than anything. He wants to chase that deal. He's still being paid by the Mavericks, so it's not about the money. It's about finding that NBA dream, realizing it and living it. And so I think because of that, he's going to spend the entire summer and maybe even into the off season. We spoke about it after he played 2 weeks for the Pelicans and garnered high praise from Coach Monty Williams, but was then released because they didn't have room for another guard on the roster, even though he played so well during those 2 weeks. You and I spoke about it then, how he was going to wait to try and make the NBA, and that's what he did. He spent over a month as a free agent before signing in Russia for the last few months of the season. He spent over a month working out with his agent, contacting NBA teams daily, and while the interest was definitely there from the NBA teams, it just couldn't work out to put it together. You mentioned the problems with the visa before his time in New Orleans, which he had picked Indiana over Oklahoma City, had trouble with the visa getting to Indiana. Then New Orleans, he was waived. Nothing materialized after that. So I think he's doing the same thing that he did then. He's waiting. He's doing everything he can. He's 27 also. He and Casspi came up together, so he's entering the prime of his career also, and he doesn't want to spend those years in Europe. Having said that, if he has to, he'll definitely prefer to be with Maccabi, and reports are he told Hapoel Yerushalayim, who also offered him the same deal as Maccabi, or maybe even a little bit of a sweeter deal, that he was only going to play for Maccabi. So as of now, he's still a free agent worldwide. He's a free agent in the EuroLeague and in the NBA, and he's doing everything he can to get signed in the NBA so he can join Casspi for a full season.
But this is basically his last chance. I mean, if he doesn't make it in the next 2 years in the NBA, I think that's probably it for him, right?
I think so. I think, unfortunately, because more than anything, it's been unlucky circumstances and never his style of play. But I do agree. I think, unfortunately, if he doesn't catch on with the team this summer or even later this year, that's probably it. And I really think it needs to happen this summer. There are just so many good point guards coming out, as there always are, of college, other guys coming from the EuroLeague. The D-League has really stepped up, and we've seen a lot of teams take D-League guards, especially combo guards who maybe didn't get drafted because they didn't fit a particular system or position. He's a pure point guard. He's the type of guy a team needs. So if he can't make it this summer, I think he'll probably realize that that's the end of the NBA dream, which would be very sad, and which we saw with Yotam Halperin and Lior Eliyahu. The difference is with Mekel more than anything. It was unlucky circumstances between the visa, between a dearth of guards on one team, between injury, all these different things that just kept him from realizing that dream.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. My guest is Joe Robbins, talking about NBA free agency. Briefly touching a bit more on Gall before we go on to another Jewish free agent. Fun to say that. Gall, you said, is currently being paid by the Dallas Mavericks. That's because they released him. Can you tell us a little more about the details? Is it significant money that he's getting from Dallas?
So it's a little bit over $1 million spread over 2 years. So it's not huge NBA money like some of the deals we've heard about, especially in the past couple of days. But it was a fully guaranteed 2-year contract. So when Dallas released him, they did so knowing that they would have to pay him. And again, Dallas didn't release him. It wasn't a situation where they said, we'd rather pay than deal with you as a headache. It was a situation where they signed J.J. Barea, who they had experience with. They knew how good he was and how important he could be. And they had three point guards on the roster in addition to Gall, and it was just too much of a logjam. And they've since made some trades to empty that out, but obviously too late for Gall. So yeah, the terms of the deal, it's a little over $1 million that he'll be receiving, which, divided over 2 seasons is probably still the max he would have made in the Euro League. So he does have some breathing room in terms of that, where he's getting that money. But obviously, even if it's as a 10-day contract, he would love to play more NBA minutes and get that worked out. And the NBA, unlike other leagues, that still works. He gets the Dallas money regardless of anything else, any new contract he signs. That's part of the collective bargaining agreement and cap space and all of that for Dallas.
It's a good deal for Gall. Even though he's not, quote-unquote, working, he's still getting paid for work. So that's a good situation to be in. Let's talk about Jordan Farmar, who played for Maccabi Tel Aviv a few years ago during the NBA lockout. Really, really beloved here in Israel. Fans kind of sad to see him go. But obviously, if you have an NBA gig, that's probably what's going to happen. Apparently, he's going to be back with Maccabi. Is that correct?
It is. So exciting news for Maccabi and Tel Aviv. And like you said, Jewish fans everywhere to be able to talk about another Jewish free agent. After playing sparingly with the Clippers last year, Farmar is back in Tel Aviv. He was playing in Europe also, and he wanted to come back to Europe. I think for him, it's another case. Maybe wanted to come back to Europe isn't the most exact phrase. I'm sure he would love to be in the NBA, but I think for him, it's a case like we were saying with Gall, where it's kind of dried up. He's a serviceable point guard, but he would probably just be trade bait at this point. So he, like so many players do now with how great Europe is and that the salaries are getting closer than they once were, he said, I'm taking my talents to Tel Aviv. And his quote today was really referred to a lot of what you said with how loved he was. He said, I'm very excited, happy to have received this opportunity and ready for the big challenge. The challenge referring to Maccabi's rebuilding year. And then he said, I can't wait for the moment that I return to the place which is like a home to me, the state of Israel, the city of Tel Aviv, and Maccabi. So really getting everything in there. He's always identified strongly as a Jew. He's always had his Jewish heritage. He loved playing for Maccabi during the lockout. They loved him. And if he has to be in Europe, he's happy to be back in Maccabi Tel Aviv. And Maccabi sent out a nice highlight reel of Farmar with his first stint in Maccabi. And he's he's ready to go. So yeah, I mean, after playing for the Clippers until January when he was released, then finishing out the rest of the EuroLeague season elsewhere, he is happy to be back in Israel if he's going to be remaining in Europe.
All right, again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here at Israel Sports and News Radio. We spent about 20 minutes talking about the Jewish free agents. Let's move to the non-Jewish free agents and talk about this whole saga with DeAndre Jordan. Very, very interesting. I don't know if we've really seen anything like this in NBA free agent history. Tell us what exactly happened with DeAndre.
DeAndre Jordan was good and happy to leave the Clippers. He was going to sign a max deal with the Dallas Mavericks. $80 million. He was going to be their cornerstone in the middle to replace Tyson Chandler. He was thrilled to do it, and then all of a sudden he wasn't thrilled to do it. He decided last night, he decided on July 8th, near nighttime, the deadline for free agency was 12:01 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday, July 9th. And about 4 or 5 hours before that, he decided that maybe he wanted to go back to the Clippers, where he was an all-star, where he was the man in the middle with Blake Griffin and Chris Paul. And he decided that he wasn't so sure. Mark Cuban said he was going to get in touch with him. Dallas wanted to meet with him, and the Clippers leadership and some of their players, Josh Reddick, who has a house in Dallas, not far from DeAndre Jordan's home in Houston. He grew up in Texas. They all drove over. They met up with DeAndre Jordan, and Blake Griffin tweeted out a picture of them blockaded in DeAndre Jordan's house, and they said, we're not leaving till 12:01 a.m. Eastern when he's signing the contract. No contract can be legal without an agent present, so his agent was flying in on chartered jet to get the deal done, and lo and behold, he went from a Dallas Maverick with every Mavericks fan celebrating over the weekend when he first announced last week. He announced on July 5th that he was going to be signing with the Mavericks. A short 4 days later, he's returning to the Clippers, who now have him up front again. And as you mentioned, we really have never seen anything like this before. 2 other times in history, players changed their mind after committing. One was Hedo Turkoglu, was decided to sign with the Toronto Raptors over the Portland Trail Blazers, and that one he was very apologetic about to the Blazers. He said he never intended to mislead them. He just had a change of heart. And the other was Carlos Boozer, had a $700,000 deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He told them he would re-sign if they let him. If they waived him, he would sign with them 4-year, $40 million deal. They waived him and he signed a 4-year, $68 million deal with the Jazz, and probably will always be hated by Cleveland for that reason. So there is some precedent about guys changing their minds, but never anything like this. Not a few hours. Literally, I mean, it was coming down to the hour that he changed his mind. He stopped taking the Mavericks calls. There was a little Twitter war with everyone announcing, using emojis, how they were getting to Houston to talk to him. And in the end, only the Clippers were allowed into his house, and he's remaining a Clipper. So really crazy story. And just to clarify, a lot of people have asked, how can this happen? How is this able to happen? Well, the reason it's able to happen is nothing becomes official until the moratorium is lifted on Thursday, July 9th at 12:01 a.m. Eastern. That's why the timing was so important. So while Jordan had announced on the 4th or the 5th of July that he was planning on signing a max deal with the Mavericks, nothing was legally binding since nothing could be signed until the 9th. So that's why he was able to make this switch. And I don't know how the Clippers did it. One of the reasons Jordan went to the Mavericks in the first place, reportedly, was that the Clippers really blew their meeting with him. Chris Paul was on vacation, didn't even fly back to meet with Jordan, and they had an underwhelming meeting. And Chandler Parsons, who's on the Mavericks, took Jordan out to dinner 5 straight nights, including many of them with Mark Cuban and other Mavericks players. So the Mavericks just blew the Clippers out of the water in terms of their presentation, but then the Clippers were able to win him back in a crazy ending, one of the craziest free agency sagas of all time in NBA history.
Okay, so the question, I guess, at least I'm wondering, why would he go to the Clippers if he's getting a max deal from Dallas? He's got a great owner in Mark Cuban, and the Mavericks want to win. I mean, the Clippers have done pretty well the past few years, but the Mavericks, if they had DeAndre Jordan and they add another piece, I mean, they'd be right there as one of the top contenders. So why would he go back to L.A.?
That's a great question. I think that's the big question that everyone has right now. I don't think we'll get a real answer because Jordan has to say all the right things about his new club, and also with what he's done to the city of Dallas, he can't say anything bad about Dallas. So I don't know if we'll get a completely honest answer, but I think it was just knowing the friends he had on the team. They said there was a rift with Chris Paul, but we know he had a great relationship with J.J. Redick and with Blake Griffin and also with Doc Rivers. One of Jordan's big questions was how good of a GM Doc Rivers is, and also how the Clippers roster would age and whether Blake Griffin would even be around for longer than 2 years. So I'm assuming Blake Griffin made some promises. Chris Paul said whatever he needed to say. Doc Rivers, who nobody questions, has had a huge impact on Jordan, and Jordan is the first one to say it. Doc Rivers turned him into Defensive Player of the Year, turned him into all of these accolades that he got. I think he probably took all of that into account and said, as much as I'd love to be in my home state, LA is pretty cool. They can offer me a lot more money, and I don't have to learn a new system. I agree that Dallas, I think, is a better place to be, has better prospects, will have more money once Dirk retires. It's a chance to play with a team that, although it doesn't have a point guard right now, has stocked people at all of the other positions and can get a manageable, serviceable point guard to work with those players. I think it's a better team in terms of the prospects of winning than this Clippers team, who it looks like maybe has missed its window with the same roster they had. So yeah, I think that's the big question, and only time will tell if he made the right decision or not. But for now, definitely, Dallas is left trying to pick up the pieces, albeit with a lot of cap space that they wouldn't have had if they had signed Jordan. But the Clippers are the ones who really have to show to him, especially if they want to keep Blake Griffin in a couple of years, that it was worth him re-signing, and they're going to be winners. They're going to be contenders, not pretenders who get close and just are outplayed because they don't have the bench or the depth. Because of, as great of a coach as Rivers is, he is shown to be a pretty terrible general manager and roster creator.
That's for sure. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. We're speaking about basketball free agency worldwide here with Joe Robbins. If you go real briefly, Joe, because the Mavericks were offering DeAndre a max contract, but the way the structure is set up in the NBA regarding free agents, the team that the player was just on can pay them the most amount of money, if that makes sense. So that means the Clippers would be in the position to offer DeAndre more money than any other team in the NBA. Is that correct?
That is correct. They'd be in the position to offer him over $100 million as opposed to the $80 million from Dallas. And the reason is teams are able, the team that the player is coming from, if they re-sign with that team, they're able to sign them to an extra year. So he does have to take an extra year with the Clippers, but instead of 4-year $80 million, it could be 5-year $110 million, $120 million. The rest of it comes into how long he's been in the league. But that's the reason. So yes, like you said, Clippers are in the biggest position to pay him more money, and get him for another year, which I think makes the deal even worse for DeAndre Jordan until the Clippers can prove that they've done more and can really get him there.
Very interesting stuff indeed. It looked like that was a done deal, and probably about 99.5% done, and still they were able to get him back to L.A. Blake Griffin really wanted to happen, probably the final piece in the puzzle to get DeAndre back with the Clippers. Last question I have for you, Joe. Very interesting in terms of ethics in journalism, legality even, especially days of social media. What is the latest with Jason Pierre-Paul? Tell our audience a bit about that story.
So this 4th of July was not very good for NFL players. First, the Buccaneers' C.J. Wilson, who was a backup defensive back and safety for them, started 2 games last season, was trying to make the team this season, was in a fireworks accident, and lost 2 fingers. Terrible story, lost 2 fingers. Jason Pierre-Paul on the same day, obviously, 4th of July, also had a fireworks accident, and he showed in some Instagram videos that were taken of him, he had a U-Haul van rented, U-Haul, famous American truck company. He rented a van that was completely filled with fireworks. He had hundreds and hundreds of fireworks, hundreds of dollars worth, and one of them, there was some mishap, and he severely injured his right hand. And there was a question about how bad it was. He and the Giants, the New York Giants, had been in a contract dispute. They wanted to sign him to a long-term deal, offered him $60 million, which, while it sounds like an insane amount of money, and definitely is, it was actually undervaluing and underpaying Pierre-Paul. So he was never going to sign that deal, and the Giants were going to put the franchise tag on him where they get him for 1 year at what would have come out to be $15 million, $14.75 million. But he was looking for a deal in the $80 million or more range. He was playing with the firework, trying to light one, blew up, he hurt his hand. No one knew what the story was. He was at a hospital in Miami near where he has his off-season home, and the Giants flew down and waited for a few days to try and see him. They were at the hospital all day Monday, the Giants training staff, trainer and medical staff, and they weren't allowed to see him. Then, finally, Adam Schefter of ESPN, who's ESPN's top NFL reporter, tweeted out the medical records showing that Jason Pierre-Paul had his right index finger amputated. Now, this is a crazy story for a lot of reasons, but even bigger than the injury on the sports ethics side, and we wish nothing but the best, a refuah shlema to Jason Pierre-Paul. We hope he'll be able to play again. We hope this isn't career ending. But moving away from the injury side, having said that, it's illegal to share medical records. Now, it's probably not illegal for Adam Schefter to share something that he was sent, but there are HIPAA laws which protect patients from having their records get out. So the hospital says it takes every violation very seriously. It's going to investigate. I'm sure the person who sent them to Adam Schefter will be fired. For Adam Schefter, though, there's a huge question of ethics and ethical reporting. He could have just said, like he had said all along, sources tell me that Jason Pierre-Paul lost his finger. He still would have broken the news. He still would have been the first. And he could have said, I have confirmation of it. But he went ahead and tweeted in this social media age. He put the scanned picture of the records and of the procedure log up on the internet for his millions of Twitter followers to see. So now everyone in the free world who has access to the internet knows that Jason Pierre-Paul lost a finger when the Giants training staff didn't know that beforehand from all reports that we're hearing. Jason Pierre-Paul definitely didn't want that getting out, or he would have had someone in his inner circle release it. So it's a big question, especially for us as sports journalists. You know, we do live in the breaking news, have to be the first, every second counts, Twitter sphere world of news. But we also live in a world where people have the right to privacy, and we're supposed to respect people's privacy. And Adam Schefter tweeting that out for millions of people to see seemingly goes against that privacy and is unethical, even if it's not illegal.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, we are living in interesting times as the Chinese curse goes, where we have information up to the millisecond. We know everything that's going on. There are no secrets. But is that necessarily a good thing? Is it good that there is not privacy, especially in a medical issue, especially a very personal issue? And these are things that we're going to explore more, and I appreciate you talking about this story. Let our audience know what is going on. And, again, Fruish Lam, a very, very serious injury that occurred. And hopefully the next pictures we see are the recovery. You know, that's what I would like to see. So recovery that way, if that's okay, of course, with Jason Pierre-Paul. Again, this has been another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. My guest has been Joe Robbins. And Joe is the founder of OMG Poetry. You can find him on Facebook under Joe R. Robbins or Joseph. Sorry, let me do it again. Sorry. Again, all right, this has been another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports News Radio. My guest has been Joe Robbins. Joe Robbins is the founder of OMG Poetry. You can find that on Facebook. You can also find Joe Robbins on Facebook as well. Joe, do you have a Twitter handle that people can find you on?
I don't. You know, I'm on Twitter, but I don't use it. So while I like to think I would run into no ethical reporting anyway, this really keeps me safe.
Okay, good for you. But anyways, you can still find Joe on Facebook. Again, OMG Poetry on Facebook as well. Joe, thanks for Jesus, hold on. We'll edit all this out. Here, I'm going to do this one more time. All right, again, this has been another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports News Radio. My guest has been Joe Robbins. He's the founder of OMG Poetry, which can be found on Facebook. And also, Joe can personally be found on Facebook as well. Joe, thanks so much for being on the show today. Great job as always.
Thank you, Ari. Great to be here and looking forward to coming on again with more exciting and hopefully healthier news.
Yeah, and one thing that was fun, we talked about 5 athletes, 3 of them Jews, so I got a real kick out of that, and hopefully I'll have more of that to come on future episodes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, the email is arilewishow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station at israelsportsandnewsradio@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and shalom from Israel.